Alison Kuo. She's an interdisciplinary artist, was born and raised in Dallas, Texas, and currently lives and works here in New York City. Her work takes the form of public performances, photographs, videos, and sculptures, all dealing with food, both as medium and subject. Alison's performances and situations explore ideas of cultural identity through absurdity and humor. By engaging her audience and her collaborators with decontextualized and altered practices involving food, she discusses themes of self-presentation and adornment. By creating sculptures and installations that take the form of food carts and restaurant replicas, untraditional spas with food, whimsical fake birthday celebrations, and by exploring her own body's relationship to different foods, Alison examines our food habits, the ways we make and consume food privately and publicly, and the metaphorical powers of the goods we consume. Alison's exhibited her work within the United States at Motel Gallery, at Beverly's, Canada Gallery here in New York, Independent Curators International, Present Company, the NARS Foundation, Sofa Gallery, Space Heater, and at the Untitled Art Fair and OHWOW in Miami, amongst many others. She's shown internationally with the 2016 Nanjing International Art Festival, the Material Art Fair in Mexico City, and she's presented a performance commissioned by Paraiso Bajo in Bogotá, Colombia, during their art fair week in 2016. She also runs a popular blog called Accidental Chinese Hipsters, where she humorously blogs about Chinese people completely ignoring all the style diktats most Westerners live by. Alison received an MFA from the School of Visual Arts from this very department, and a BA from Southwestern University in Georgetown, Texas. She teaches workshops on performative cooking and dining at the Abrons Art Center, and she recently joined our faculty here at SVA. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Alison Kuo.
I'm going to start with a project that I did in October of this year, or this past year, 2017. It was called Bone Bath. I was asked by a group of curators who were commissioned to do an exhibition in the Zaha Hadid apartment building that just opened up on the High Line. So these real estate developers are trying to rent out $50 million apartments, and they want cool young curators and artists to come in and throw a party and make it look hip, make it look like the Whitney, but don't mess anything up. So I was like, okay, I'll use this as a way to talk about how I would approach any project because of the way that I work. It's often I'm invited to come and do a performance somewhere. I have other studio practices, but often it's we want a performance at our opening. We want something to happen that engages with the audience, engages with the community. Can you please make it fun and new? But there are sometimes some strings attached that or limitations that I find helpful in a way because it's something that I can work with and work around. So in this case, they wanted me to do something with food. They didn't, I didn't want to mess up this $10 million apartment, so they put me in a bathtub. And I thought, great, okay, I'm in the bathtub. I'm going to research the High Line and the history of the High Line because I know it's a place where food used to come into New York City. We live on an island, lots of people on a small island. How are you going to get the, steak and milk and produce that people need every day to keep the city running? It used to come in down the Hudson River through the High Line area was, as you know, the meatpacking district. There was a train that went along 10th Avenue that would routinely just kill people on the street. So it was actually known as Death Avenue. Not a lot of rich people living there at the time. And the problem got so bad that they actually had cowboys riding in front of the train, trying to warn people to run away from the train. This went on for decades until the city finally built the High Line to elevate the train up for safety. Then that became another kind of problem for the city when they no longer needed the train. They turned it into the park that we now know and is a big tourist attraction. And it's become a huge moneymaker for real estate developers in New York City. So what do you think about all that research and how it relates to what I'm interested in? One thing that came to mind was, okay, it used to be meat, like raw meat or cattle coming in and being slaughtered. What do we have now? We have highly processed food. So I did a lot of research into gelatin and looking into Knox Gelatin still has this kind of 1950s style manual on how to make different Jell-O products on their website. And I did a lot of math, but I really thank my middle school geometry teacher for teaching me how to do proofs and figure out how much Jell-O I needed to fill up a bathtub. And I worked it out. And this is also just so you can see one of the apartments in the building, which also has these amazing floor-to-ceiling windows inside of the bathroom that face a public park. So I know that this is a whole separate thing, but a lot of my work, because it is ephemeral and performative, exists in documentation, which for us means it's on social media. So you may have seen my rant on Instagram. While the opening of the show was going on, while I was doing the performance for 3 hours, lots of people took my picture, posted on the internet. I heard about it later from friends, oh, I saw you all over Instagram. I was like, wow, I'm not really the kind of artist who usually takes my clothes off for my art, so I'm glad this is the one. But then I posted my own picture of myself in the same performance last week on Instagram, and it got taken down for community standards. So, that did make me think about, pieces can exist over time, even though it was a one-off performance. I still think about how the visibility of people who live in these apartments plays into kind of the politics and the power dynamics of what it means to have an expensive piece of property in New York City and to live in an expensive piece of property. And what does that do to you as a person? I was also very lucky to collaborate with my partner Williamson Brasfield on making a score for this project. So I'm just going to play a little bit now. So I'll be returning to this idea later in my talk. A lot of what I do is kind of a collage aesthetic of collection and rearranging and addition and chopping things up and reusing them. So when I asked Williamson to collaborate with me, I wanted this performance to have a more serious but kind of cinematic feeling when people came into the bathroom to see me in the bathtub. So I asked him to make a score, but I didn't give him a lot of direction beyond that. We ended up recording a lot of field sounds from when I was testing out the Jell-O in the kitchen and the water sounds and ice sounds. And then he took a song, I Fall to Pieces, and kind of chopped it up throughout the score. This one thing that I would say is very interesting about Jell-O is that it's almost, when you are making a large batch of Jell-O, you realize that it is just broken down proteins, and they will form back together into a body. So this thing that's almost like what we might consider like not really food, or it's kind of a joke, like 1960s like housewives making Jell-O molds. It's very visceral. It's made with animal remains, and it's that's something that I was thinking about in the project, is like how far away are we from the source of our food, and how far removed are we from the labor that goes into making it, the violence that goes into making it. At one time, yes, you would see a train going down the street, full of cattle going to slaughter, and it was kind of dangerous and strange. But now you go to the grocery store and you get Jell-O, and you don't necessarily think about how it got to the grocery store and what happened in like the processing plant. I'm doing this presentation. I'm not doing it in chronological order, and most of my work is about food, as Mark said in the introduction. But I'm not limited to only speaking about food. And one thing that I was doing this past year as kind of a personal challenge was stepping outside of going to food as the first thing that I'm thinking about when I'm making a piece. And I did a series of about 3 performances in a month that were all very personal and about the death of my grandmother in Hong Kong. And this was actually at Donna Cleary's project space. Donna's here. Hey, thank you. Donna worked with me through like a lot of ideas and thinking, and actually she asked me to do this, and then I went to the funeral and came back and was totally open to me changing everything, because everything changed when I inherited my grandmother's Peking opera beard, which you can see I'm wearing in these photos. So I did a performance in Donna's apartment where I was just trying to understand what to do with these remnants of my grandmother. Would tell me about the part of her life where she was an opera singer and a performer, but it was very kind of segmented from her role as like a mother and a provider and caregiver. So I was taking all these objects that I had just gotten from her and wanting to talk to other people about what do you do with these things? What is our responsibility to the objects of these people from the past and to their stories? And also as an artist, what do I need to take in to my work from this? And I wanted to show this too, just to briefly say that whenever I'm making work, I actually came to art not through performance at all, and so weirdly, part of me does not think of myself as a performance artist, but I think a lot about Valley Export and Touch Cinema and Ana Mendieta and women performance artists of the 20th century, and that is the legacy that has made it possible for me to do what I do now. So now I'll get back to food. This is a chart that I made actually when I was in Mark Tribe's class in grad school, and I have added to it a lot, and I show it when I teach classes about food and art, and I want to tell people, this can be anything, but also why are we talking about food and art? And it just kind of like is a wall of information, but this is really how I feel whenever I pick up a new topic or a project. It's such a relatable topic to so many other things that I'm interested in, and that can be relevant to other people that I want to work with or communities that I want to collaborate with. So there's a lot there, and it's all connected. So I'll rewind back to when I first started working with food. I was thinking a lot about this can be anything. This can, taking your idea of what it's like to go eat in a restaurant or cook at home and just kind of exploding it into, now it's a part of your art practice. Initially, I was really into making these kind of vending machines that I would put myself inside of. So I would make a box and put words on the outside with different kind of prompts. Someone can approach me, and then I would ask them to choose one or more of these words, and then I would make something quickly for them inside of the box and hand it out through the hole. And you can see in the background too, as New York City is full of amazing Photoshop collages on the outside of every deli, and I still can't get enough of them. I was definitely really into that at the time. So this was kind of a great way for me to get started, and to, it's kind of like an automatic feedback machine too, because you hand somebody something and then they immediately want to tell you what it makes them think of, what it makes them feel, what does the taste like. So this is a great way for me to get started. I also would like to mention the Futurist Cookbook. Just thinking about the kind of art historical context that I'm operating inside of, I love reading this, and I still go back to it all the time. I give it as a reading in classes that I teach. In a nutshell, the Futurists that you all know, the Italian Futurists. In addition, they wanted to smash society and change things, and it was all about like violence and machines and what's the future. They also thought that pasta was something that was really holding society back. I'm serious. And they were really anti-pasta, so they wrote a whole manifesto and book about it, and they had somewhat of a restaurant. I don't really know how much it was a restaurant or more of like people hanging out. And I don't know how many of these recipes were put into the world. Some of them are much more abstract, and some of them are things that can be made. But I love the manifesto format, and I love the, in the way that you might plan a sculpture by doing a sketch first. This is a great way to think about how to make work with food. Is just, not think about what's possible and not possible, but just throw it out there, the craziest idea that you can think of. There also, a big one for me is the artist's project and restaurant Food that was in Soho in the early 70s. That was made by Gordon Matta Clark and Caroline Godin. The story of Food is that, Soho at the time was pretty vacant, so the city was basically giving these artist lofts to artists to come and have studios and live in, but there weren't a lot of businesses there, and there wasn't a place for the artist community to eat. So Gordon Matta Clark and Caroline Godin started this restaurant. It lasted about a year. It was a place where you could go and get a simple meal, but you would also go and you would see the other people in your community. So you're all in your studios, but then you come together and eat. And then maybe on Sunday they would have a special menu. So someone like Joseph Beuys would come and use all the bones from the other dinners to make a bone-themed Sunday dinner as more of an artwork. I also, I think more and more as I work in this vein, gentrification is a topic that is very present for me, thinking about food and class and gentrification. So, obviously we know what Soho is like now. I think this is a really interesting project, and a lot of times artists do things with food and it's kind of a side note to their work, and this one is something that's gotten more attention. But I think there's not enough criticality probably put to this yet. Caroline Godin is also the other half of this equation. Gordon Matta Clark is often the one who's given the most credit for this project, but she was the one who had to go and make sure the restaurant was open every day. Is it clean? Do you have enough stock so you can cook the food for the day? And I work in a very project-based way, and a lot of times people will say, oh, you should just start a restaurant or start a business. And I'm like, no, that's too hard. That's not what I don't want to do one thing for the next 5 years. I want to do 10 things for the next 1 year. But I do admire this. So if that was before, this is something that I've been very honored to be a part of that happened this year, which is that kind of stemming out of the curator I worked with for the first show that I showed you, Bone Bath. I got invited to be in a photo shoot for Days magazine that was sort of like, they asked this curator, like, show me the New York food art scene, who's in it? And then they invited us to come and do a photo shoot and take interviews. So these are some of the other artists: Ghetto Gastro, Little Deb's Oasis, Jen Monroe, and these are all people that I've been researching them and reading reviews of dinners that they've done and really interested in them. And it was such a privilege to be able to be a part of that group and to meet each other. And I think the interesting thing about spending a day in a room with these people was that we all kind of felt like we were doing things alone, or there's no real structure or path laid out for, are you an artist? Are you a caterer? Are you a chef? What do you want to do with that? Bread sculpture or interactive food art, it doesn't fit into one category, but it is becoming something, because it is such, I think, a rich topic to mine. There are a lot of people that are doing this right now, and it was great to meet them. So now I'm going to show you some other things that I've done. I'm going to start with a project called Takeout Banquet that I made for the Lehman College Gallery in the Bronx for a show about immigration last year. So it's right around the time of the travel bans coming out, and a lot of anxiety about immigration and who might be at risk in our communities. So I started this project. I didn't want to redo something I'd done before. So I started it out by asking a lot of questions about the neighborhood around the gallery, and where people eat, people who work at the gallery, or students, because it's mostly a college area, what's there. And I think I asked, the curator, were there any Chinese places? And they were like, maybe. And then I Googled it, and there were a million Chinese takeout places in, maybe a mile block radius. So before I went there, I did a lot of Googling and looking at Google reviews of these takeout restaurants so I could get an idea of how people relate to them. So I don't know if you can read the reviews here. Let's see, this one. Love the chicken egg foo young with white rice, and they know how to fry maduros, and sweet tea is off the hook, smiley face. A lot of these reviews are either about how hey, this restaurant, makes really good fried chicken, or complaints about the service being rude, which to me is always interesting when you research about what are the different service traditions culturally. Chinese service is often perceived as rude by Western audiences or Western customers, because it can maybe more abrupt than they're used to. But I found this to be a really great way to get to know what I was looking for. And then I made a map of all of the restaurants that would be in the area of the school. And I went there and I took a map of the university and an invitation for the show and a business card to everybody. And I said, hey, is it cool? I'm going to call you later today and I'm going to order a lot of Chinese food. Can you deliver it to this gallery? Here are the instructions. And I probably got about 8 places to say that they would. So the idea of this banquet is that I would have all the menus and have them available on a table in the gallery, and that was it. There's a tablecloth and table, that's all I get to start with, and the money that they gave me for doing the piece. And then throughout the 2 or 3 hour opening, people would come and help me choose what to order, and we order it together, and then we put it on the table, and anyone's allowed to eat whatever they want or take it home, order more, and we keep doing that until we run out of money. And the other rules, I think I had to pay in cash and I have to tip the delivery person. So it was definitely an experiment to do this for the first time at an opening. Sometimes you don't have a choice. But it turned out really well. There were all of these high school students who lived by the gallery who came by and hung out and were into the piece enough that they could kind of help me explain it to other people as they came in. Because I wanted to talk to people about like what is your relationship to these restaurants and to the people that work there? Like how much, you know, in a way, when we're thinking about immigrants and what they contribute to our society, it's like, well, what would you do if you couldn't go to your favorite Chinese takeout place and get dinner a few times a week? It's cheap, it's convenient, it tastes really good. So I wanted people to tell me about the relationship with these places, and I wanted to meet the delivery people. And I do like to spring art projects on unsuspecting Chinese delivery restaurants sometimes, but as long as I'm throwing them a lot of money, they seem to be okay with it. And then I also got to meet a lot of board members that night for the college, and that was an interesting part of the project because this food was very exotic to them. And that's something that I encounter in my work a lot is, you know, having these like, sometimes art people, you know, with good intentions kind of come to me and they say like, oh my God, I can't believe you're giving people Cheetos. Don't you know what, this is poison and terrible? And I'm like, have you tasted a Cheeto? It's really good. Like, maybe you should think about why you would say something like that. So yeah, so they were there. They were very excited to eat ribs. And we had a great time, and we ended up the night with almost all of the food being eaten. And I had sort of the remnants of this performance being the checks and the receipts. And this is part of kind of an ongoing investigation and research topic for me. So I don't really think of this as being completely over. I think of it as something that I want to revisit later or look at from another angle later. So I save everything and I think about it as somewhat open-ended. So with that, I just want to tell you a little bit more about how I do research and what that entails. So I take a lot of pictures and I try to get into as many kind of different food contexts as I can. So just in this picture, there are roasted carrots in the background that I actually was very lucky when I first started working with food to be introduced to a chef who was willing to trade kind of cooking lessons with me for graphic design work. So I would go to his kitchen and he would show me how to roast carrots or how to set up my mise en place so that, I really never worked in a kitchen before and I needed to learn how these things are organized and done because it's a complicated way of making things. So as I'm learning, I'm also taking pictures. Who knows what's going to happen later? There's also just a giant carrot that I bought in Chinatown, which is a great place for art supplies. So this is another example of what I might do with research photos. It's kind of a way for me to think about things. So this was a lot of pictures from a trip to Mexico City, mixing things from the Anthropological Museum with dorilotes, which are these like single-serving Dorito bags that you slice open and put chili and cheese and stuff on top of, mixed in with like sculptures that I was making. And I like making pictures and images, and I like having this as sort of a condensed version of my notes to myself. So anything that I'm doing is sort of like putting things together. This was a project that I did with a sculptor where we were instructed to interpret a chapter from Gloria Anzaldua's Borderlands. And so we were thinking about art as a living thing and art as like a shrine or something for the living to interact with. So we made these sculptures for pigeons to eat out of rice and vegetables, and then we found the dirtiest possible place we could to take pictures of them, and we were like, pigeons will come here, and not really, so I had to Photoshop the pigeons in later. But this is like underneath the Manhattan Bridge. But another thing about working in this collage way is that it is a very good medium for collaboration and opening things up so that I can do what I want and someone else can do what they want and we can bring it together. I have a studio that I go and make things in. Sometimes, again, it's sort of like collecting materials and thinking about them. And I'm not really making objects for a specific purpose so much as for me to kind of like touch objects that maybe connect to some other idea that I'm thinking about and work with them. I also have a lot of costumes. I do a lot of video shoots, or costumes are very useful when you're doing a performance and you just sort of let people know who you are and what you're doing. But I've definitely done, like this photo is from a collaboration with a friend of mine where we combined all of the weird costumes that we had and brought in some other friends to be models. This is an attempt at making fruit instruments with a lot of my friends here at SVA, just putting things together and seeing what happens. I don't put a lot of pressure on myself for it to work or be successful, and most of these instruments did not really make any sound, but it was still a great experience and a sculptural moment. These are just more objects from my studio. I also, as I'm doing these performances, they're often very responsive to the situation or the site and the audience, but they can be done again. Or a lot of times people will say, hey, I really like that. Can you do it again for this show? And I don't want to, or I can't do it again. So I'll do a different version of the piece. So this is a performance called Make You a Drink. That's it's very fun. It's easy to do, and I'm standing behind this kind of like faux painting front, putting my arms through the sleeves, and then I have ingredients in front of me, and I can't see them, but I can talk to the person and make them a cocktail. And I originally had made it for the Untitled Art Fair in Miami, and it was going into like the VIP lounge area. So it was fairly lighthearted. It was also kind of a way for me to mess with the people coming into the VIP lounge. And I'll just play the video from that in the background. Yeah, and so I think about 2 or 3 years later is when I made the piece that's on the left, which was my Make You a Drink Sadness edition that I was invited to come to the Abrons Art Center for more of like a community art show. It's connected to the Henry Street settlement, so they have this really awesome kind of multi-generational community that comes to the Abrons Art Center. And it was the day after the inauguration, so I can use the ingredients to sort of talk about what I want to talk about without having to be kind of overtly like, this is what I'm saying. So I had Fanta, crushed up Cheeto rim, I had some Velveeta cheese, so I would swish the rim around in the Velveeta, put it in the crushed up Cheetos, some golden peanuts, and then I had this little dropper full of, when I told people it was full of tears, and I just gave it to them and I said, add however many tears that you want to for how you're feeling, and they were just like squeezing it out into their drinks. And it was actually, for its kind of a lighthearted performance, it was a very kind of touching moment, because a lot of people, like, I can't see what I'm doing and the ideas that I'm fumbling around and making a mess, but they really wanted to help me, and they really wanted to talk to me about how they were feeling, but they also wanted to do something for me, which was nice. It was nice to be able to kind of talk about something in the moment as it was happening with other people with my work. Oh. Can you do it? This is another shot from my studio. Again, thinking about iteration. There's something about this that I keep coming back to, but sometimes like this piece may never really see the light of day beyond this documentation. So now I'm going to rewind just for a minute and talk about how I got started, and why I'm comfortable with doing things more than once and changing them or discarding them. And that is because I studied as a ceramics artist when I was an undergrad. So my mentor was a functional potter, and I learned the discipline and the craft and the history of ceramics. And I went to study ceramics in China, and just like that was kind of the main thing that I was channeling all of my ideas through. As you can see, there's not a lot of color in these works. They're all made of porcelain with the same glaze. If I never would have thought that I would be making now what I am back when I was doing this, but now I can see how it all kind of comes together. I was very interested in the design of vessels and how design and function communicate a lot about what you want other people to know and to do. So the shape of a cup or the way that it sits on the table will tell somebody, you know, are we having a part, like, are you drinking out of a solo cup? Or are you drinking out of a tiny porcelain cup that's gonna fall over if you don't put it down on the table just right? And, you know, that's more or less still what I'm thinking about now. But another thing is that, you know, I couldn't make this work in New York City. Like, the pace of life and things that happen here, this is the kind of art that, like, you're just in the studio every day, like, checking on your clay, like, how is it responding to this 2% change in humidity? And I'm gonna sand this one piece for 10 hours. And life is different here, so it was a really big adjustment. But I'll always be really thankful for my undergraduate mentor. Patrick Bierkamp told me when I graduated, he was like, you're gonna graduate, you're not gonna have this institutional support and studio and firing and, you know, all of these things that you've been making your work with, and I don't want that to stop you from continuing to make your work, because you need to continue to make work. So he's like, if all you have is a room with a little desk and you can make a drawing, then make a drawing, and that's what you should do. So when I left university, I did work out of a ceramic studio for a while, but I quickly switched over to making soft sculptures and hand sewing sculptures. So it was still very connected to craft and just exploring, like, the possibilities of a medium to make forms, but I was brave enough to start using color. And then I was, through serendipitous reasons, I ended up in this group show with a group of New York artists who were all these animators, mostly animators and drawers, and really just kind of like loud, colorful, like, you know, let's make it sloppy kind of people. And so that was the first time that I was forced to not be totally attached to craft. So I had to make this vacuum cleaner monster, and I had to use hot glue for part of it. And it broke my heart, but it was a great lesson to learn moving to New York. So I think that is something that I think about sometimes, is falling where you need to or want to on the continuum of, you know, this is the worst craftsmanship imaginable to, like, this is perfect. I intentionally don't strive for perfection because I know that it helps me as an artist to keep it somewhere on this end of the spectrum. So yeah, so now skip back ahead to something very recent, but yeah, I'm not afraid of color anymore, or of getting messy. This is from a show that I did, a piece that I did at the Young at Art Museum in Florida. It was at a party for adults, so this is, again, like alcoholic beverages, but it wasn't for the kids. And it was kind of an opportunity to do a bigger project in a new city with a lot of access to institutional resources and to a new network of people. So that was a really exciting thing for me to get to do. I did the Make You a Drink performance again, that's what they wanted, but then I was able to expand it into this project where I was collaborating with chefs who had a mini pie business. So I got to work with people who have to make the same thing perfectly hundreds and hundreds of times every day, and sit down with them and think about, well, how can I introduce kind of unexpected moments into your practice, and how can you influence me so that I can make something for 200 people with some kind of consistency throughout the night of this party. So it's a shot of in an interaction. This is behind the scenes. I also really like working in behind the scenes spaces. So a lot of this piece is also about giving people the sensation that they were missing out on something, and the only way that they could see what was going on was to participate. But in order to participate, they had to stick their heads through these, let's see, I don't have a picture in here. They had to stick their head into a hole that did not allow for their arms, so they were not allowed to take a selfie or take pictures of the event or show someone else. You had to do it yourself. So part of this project that I was really excited about was that I got to meet this kind of guerrilla fruit distributor. The chefs that I was collaborating with sell their pies out of a market, and I went to the market to just do research and think about ingredients for our project, but I also asked them, who is your favorite booth at this market? And they said, it's this guy, Farm Fresh Raw Foods. He gets all these really hard to find tropical fruits, and he's just sort of a character, and he's really enthusiastic and passionate about getting fruit to people, getting them the fruit they need. So we got to go to his warehouse in North Miami and uncover these secret fruit stashes, and buy the flower from a banana plant, and he's weighing it out on a scale on the floor. And there are so many things that I might not know about or be directly connected to, living in in my art world bubble of my job and my kind of daily routine. So when I get to go somewhere else, I'm always asking okay, where do you think I should go? What do you think I should do to look for materials? And also one of my chefs was a trick juggler, a cocktail style bartender, and we got to work that into the performance a little bit too. So I would just say a little bit more about this. What I really liked about doing this project was the collaboration that I was able to do with the institution, with people who work in the gift shop who are also really talented at sewing were working for me, and people who were, guest services were also great performers. And, I was there, Williamson made amazing sculptures. I worked with these chefs who were I've never made a pie that I thought, a pepper pie, and people actually liked it. So the end result of this show was that, yes, I think about audience a lot, and sometimes the audience is the most important thing to me, but I would actually say that in a show or a piece like this, the process and the collaboration and the people that I made it with was much more important than the final product that happened. So just talk to you a little bit about, that is kind of that's what sustains me as an artist in New York, is I love to collaborate, always collaborating, and I have a really wonderful community of artists here who support me and who I support, and sometimes I make work with them, sometimes we go to other cities and make shows together, or in this picture is just, Beverly's, which is a bar, also a project space started by Leah Dixon, who's one of my classmates at SVA. She wanted to do something for the 4th of July. like something patriotic. So we all brought like garbage materials from our studios to the park across from the bar and made floats, and then we paraded them around Chinatown. It was like handing out party favors to kids. And it was a great reminder of like the importance of having that cohort of people. So this is, you know, Beverly's is a place that shows work that I think that no one would show or I'm making just for myself. But Beverly's is also a place where I have, you know, basically it's a, you know, fellow artists who are the best curators that I could have for my work. You know, sometimes when I tell a gallery what I want to do and what I need to be able to do it, they get a little bit nervous or upset, but because this is a different type of space. It's not a gallery that's going to go out and sell a bunch of my work and make my living with me, but it is a group of people who are, you know, of a similar mindset, who understand, you know, who kind of celebrate like weirdness and strange approaches to making art, and they're, you know, they're like, great, do whatever you need to do, you know, see you next time kind of a thing. So that has been something that's been very important to keeping the momentum that I needed in my practice to keep moving forward. Side note on this also, I have a lot of different artists that I collaborate with. One of them is Stina Poitinen, who I have shown with through Beverly's a few times. This is a little fun, like, I have a lot of like weird little one-off projects that I wouldn't necessarily have time to show you in a presentation like this, but this is something called Spiritual Sausage that was for a barbecue that the Abrons Art Center threw. So Stina was having people make sort of mood boards out of collage materials and put them into condoms to make a chain of sausages about our hopes and dreams, and then I was interpreting those into hot dog form. And that was probably one of the worst tasting things that I've inflicted on people, and I found most of the hot dogs later that night, like hidden around different areas of the courtyard. So I learned my lesson on like overcooking meat and then putting whipped cream on it, but what can you say? So try to zoom through the rest of this. This is the project that that video was inside of, which we were invited to come to the Material Art Fair and do something with Beverly's inside of this kind of like, you know, lounge area that art fairs always have. So we asked them to give us somewhere that was kind of like back of house, which ended up being behind the wall, false walls, in an area with a bunch of giant air conditioning units, which was perfect. And we made a miniature version of Beverly's. And we commissioned something like 40 artists. And she was going to school at the time in the UK, and I was here, and we like asked all these people to make miniature artworks for us to show at our tiny Beverly's. So it became a way to like include more people into the fair, but then also it became this really democratizing social space where, I'll show you in a second, the director of the fair is playing beer pong against, you know, like college students who are checking it out, you know, from California or something like that. And people, you know, on the staff of the fair could come and sit down and rest and hang out, and the artists who were there like working hard all day could like come and talk to each other, and, you know, we had these little kind of social games going, but it was really just a place where we could kind of level it out. We ended up also making friends with this like really great rapper from Houston and his DJ who just showed up to play dice every day. And I realized through that, like, hey, we're actually pretty similar in the way that we think about our work. I didn't assume that I would have a lot in common with a rapper from Houston, but, you know, I now have a friendship with that person because I was able to make a space where we could meet and talk to each other. Actually, through that show, I met this really amazing performance artist from Colombia who's friends with Pedro. And I loved her work, and I I stayed in touch with her, and she and her friends have a gallery in Bogotá that they invited me to come and do a performance again that I actually said before I never wanted to do again. But when I got invited to do it in Bogotá, I was like, this is a really different context. I would love to see what happens and what is possible there. So I was able to go for a week and do research and fabricate signs in the district in Bogotá, where if you have a hair salon, you can go and have your advertisements made, which is this neighborhood actually, and then I did this piece, and I actually also learned from the curators right before it started that Colombians don't like to participate in things. So it was an extra challenge to kind of convince people to do it. But Cone Spa is a project that I've done in the past where I sort of do these beauty treatments with candy and other junk food. And it's really a way for me. I'm always thinking about how can I push my audience to try something they wouldn't normally try. Well, it's also a challenge to myself to do something I wouldn't normally feel comfortable doing, and then to just have a nice moment and have fun and take care of other people and take something that's a luxury service and make it free and make it silly. So that's marshmallow massages are very popular, always. Yeah. And so just so you can see where that came from, because I have done this before, I originally developed it for Asbury Park on the boardwalk in New Jersey, because the curator had these amazing ice cream cone chairs, and she was like, please do something with ice cream. And I was like, okay. That was actually a great learning experience. That was with Transformer and Victoria Reese, and she had all the artists in this residency before we even got to Asbury Park read about the history of the town and come in and meet people who work in all different kind of nonprofit and community organizations in the town, and really learn about the place and the audience and the community that we were making our work for before we even thought about what we were going to make. And did one other time in Brooklyn, also very different and very fun. And I'm going to say now, I'm probably not going to do this again, but you never know. So going back even farther in time, this is the Accidental Chinese Hipsters blog, which I ran for about a year, 2010. Or no, it says 2014. Okay, it's been more recent than that. I moved to New York City. I love Chinatown. It was the only place where I felt really comfortable in this city. And I spent a lot of time there, and I remember just walking down the street one day and seeing this older gentleman, and he had neon green suspenders and this really wacky outfit, and I was living in Williamsburg at the time when it was still Williamsburg, the Bushwick kind of its day, and I was like, okay, there's something going on here. So I made this blog just as a kind of joke between a few friends, and it got put on the Gothamist, and I suddenly had thousands of followers added each day, and I was really didn't know what to do with that, and was doing interviews and talking to people about should I make a book, and I was like, I don't think this is what I want to do with this is not really everything about who I am, but it was an important project for me because it was a way for me to expand my notion of who's in my community and what basically, and my thinking about my own identity and what that means to me, and having people really from Australia and Taiwan and Canada and everywhere, sending me photos of their family, sending me photos of someone they saw on the bus or their childhood pictures, and sending me a note about this is why I thought this person was amazing. So I think now, I don't know if I would do something like this now, because there is something, questionable about taking pictures of people when they don't know that you're taking their picture, but I always kept the writing that went along with these photos very positive and very much about like, this is what I want to celebrate about the Asian American community, or, you know, just like the experience of being an immigrant kid in an unfamiliar land, and just being like, okay, I'm going to be a skateboarder now. And I'm continuing to still learn about this kind of stuff today. You know, I brought in Mei Loom from Wing on Woe to speak to you guys, and outside of the art community, I think the Asian American community and the activism there is something that's really important to me. So through that, I actually met another artist, Rita Ikonen, who had a studio in Chinatown, and she also was really interested in collaborating or doing a project with senior citizens in Chinatown. We got a residency through the Spark program, which has a different name now, but you can still apply for it. They put you in a senior center, and you can teach a class, and you can do like a project or a final show or something. So this was our wearable art class, and these were our like amazing students who went from being like, I don't really understand what you're talking about, you know, we'd show them our art, to like, let's make a music video and dress up with vegetables and run around in Chinatown and not be embarrassed or afraid. And we had an awesome time. So I think collaboration is something that I love to do, and I love to work with other artists. And I really like to always expand my idea of like, who are those other artists? And they had a show and a gallery. It was great. So this is the final project I'm just going to show to you guys. This is something from a couple years ago. This is part of my kind of ongoing fascination with Chinese takeout food in New York City, and Chinese takeout food in other communities like outside of China. So whenever I get to go to a new place, I'm always looking for the Chinese restaurants and what they're serving. So I was invited to do a performance at this gallery in Brooklyn, and I walked around the neighborhood kind of thinking about like what I want this to be about, and I saw this restaurant, and I just thought it was like a really beautiful place, and I loved the way everything looked, and and I could see that it was like a place that people would come, it was a very popular place in the neighborhood. So I asked for their permission to photograph the restaurant, and then I made a sort of replica of it in the gallery, which was across the street. And I also made a replica of the menu with some of my own information overlaid on top. And for the night of the performance, I asked people to go to the restaurant, buy whatever they want to eat, and then bring it to me in the gallery, and then I would kind of like re-food style it into this sort of like, very high-end art cuisine. And I had my friend Pik Xuan Feng there helping me as an assistant food stylist. And it was a great night, both just for the sculptures that got made and sort of what people thought about, this, like, I think it's weird, sometimes people are just surprised, like, oh, this food is really good. It's not expensive and it tastes good. And what a service that is to the community. And I met this Chinese guy who lives down the block who was like, yeah, I go there every day. And I actually don't speak Chinese very well, basically not at all. So I asked him to like explain my project better to the people at the restaurant. And out of that, I've wanted to do kind of more into this and more in depth, which has led me to the takeout banquet project that you saw earlier, and perhaps the next thing that I'm going to do. So I am going to play this video, but I'm also ready for Q&A. It's sort of an atmospheric takeout video to take us out of this. So thank you very much for coming.
How you doing?
Hello.
The first image in the tub, were you inspired by anybody? Because it reminds me of Tupac's shot he did with David LaChapelle. when he got out of jail. And
Oh, I don't know that. Is he in a bathtub?
Yeah,
Or-
if you, look it up. He got out of jail, and it's the shot. The name, the title of the shot is called like "Becoming Clean." So
I think I was inspired by visually maybe by Ana Mendieta or women who use their bodies in their work, and peers of mine. I had just seen a performance by one of my friends from SVA, Katrine, who's an Icelandic performance artist, and I was just reminded, like, you can do anything. It's your body, and you can do stuff in the ways in which you can sort of desexualize your own body as a woman can be really powerful and interesting. But I was also thinking a lot about the movie The Shining and the scene where they're just in this like fever dream and they walk into a hotel room and they see like people in like animal costumes having sex, and there's like a scene where there's like he's making out with a woman and she's decomposing, and the sort of the horror of everyday life.
Hey, thanks, Allison. It's obvious that you use different types of food, but I was just curious about your fascination with junk food in particular, and if it means anything to you, or if you have a message that you're trying to relay.
Yeah, I think part of that fascination, maybe part of why I started using that type of food was because it was a safer choice for me to serve. A lot of times when I work on these performances, I don't have a kitchen, or I may not even have access to running water. So I am very conscious of food safety and the trust that I have with my audience, where I don't want them to feel nervous to eat something, and I don't want to feel nervous to serve it to them. So I started thinking more about packaged foods, or even foods that other people can cook for me. But when I started using it, it became more and more interesting to me because of, I think I mentioned earlier, the way that different people would react to it. So on one hand, it could be like a magnet. Like if I really was hoping to get the people who live on the block of an art space to actually come to the opening and see it, if there was one performance where I was kind of frustrated with the curators for like locking the doors to this gallery when they said it was like a community event, but the only people who were there were like bussed in from New York City. So I had my hot dog cart full of junk food, and I just like rolled it around in the neighborhood, and I was like, let's go play in the backyard of this place. And it's designed to be fun and inviting, but then to also see the reaction that people have to like that I would use that and not have some sort of message of like, but don't you know this is bad. That's like a very classist kind of reaction to want me as an artist to sort of teach people correct behavior and not to eat things that have sugar or fat in them, which I think is like actually pretty ridiculous and oftentimes like classist and racist. So that's kind of why I continued down that path.
I was at that last piece that you showed with the Chinese takeout restaurant in Brooklyn, and I was just curious about how you negotiated the issues that you're so in touch with around gentrification and class. I remember, so the way it worked was you would go to the restaurant and order a dish, take it out, bring it to the gallery across the street, and then you would give it to you, and then you would kind of make a new dish out of the food with all kinds of exotic ingredients and a kind of a food sculpture out of it. While I was at the restaurant waiting for my order to be ready, I was sort of chatting with a bunch of the regular customers and saying, hey, do you know about this thing going on down the street? You should come check it out. And then when I got to Motel Gallery, it was the clientele of your show was super different from the clientele of the restaurant. And then more recently, there was this protest against, was it Omer Foss, who did a show in Chinatown and created this sort of replica of a Chinese establishment. So I'm sure you've thought about this a lot, and how did you negotiate those issues in that project?
Yeah, I have thought about it a lot. When the Omar Fast controversy happened, and before that at the Spring Break Art Fair last year, when there was a show called Show Main that was kind of replicating a Chinese takeout restaurant, but it wasn't actually part of the content of the work. And I don't want to be afraid of getting myself into those situations, and I don't want to avoid them, but I think that in approaching it, what I had to think about was my responsibility. And what I wanted to get out of that was to show people who were maybe coming to that neighborhood for the first time or coming there as newcomers, to think about who is there and what their lives are like and what things are important to the people that live there, and to spend some time in those spaces where you are the outsider and you should maybe be careful not to bother people that are getting their dinner. Actually felt kind of bad. Apparently there was a pregnant woman from the neighborhood who was like waiting way longer than she wanted to for her dinner that night, and I was like, okay. I did kind of not want to tell the restaurant too much about what I was doing because I didn't want that to affect the way the project played out, but I did, kind of ask their permission to take the pictures and give them a little bit of a warning about what was going on. I don't know if that answers your question. I think it came up a lot also when I did the Accidental Chinese Hipsters project, which was really good training for that, because every single time I wrote a post, or even every single time I got an email from someone with a picture, it was like a very careful situation in which I had to think about what is the intention behind this, who's using their knowledge to laugh. It's like laughing at someone, laughing with someone. I would rather, as an Asian American, to see more representation in culture, and I would rather that people not just say like, well, I don't want to offend anyone, so I'm not gonna do anything around this area and avoid it. But I do think it's like a super careful, it just takes a lot more work and consideration. And I had people approaching me when I did the blog and say like, hey, like we wanna syndicate this and we'll have other writers help you write it. And they sent me like sample copy, and I was like, no, I can't really have anyone else doing this, because only I can be responsible for and know how careful that I have to be. And that's why I also, set up these kind of intimate situations, because if someone doesn't like something, they can tell me right to my face, or I can see what's going on, and I think that's important too.
I was wondering, like, what sort of media you consume, because it's like I feel like your work is like so wild. It kind of reminds you of like Major Lazer music videos and like Paper Rad and just like wild. I was just wondering like what you kind of like. Is there like, yeah, like what you're into? Like, what is
everything. I definitely like Major Lazer and Paper Rad, and I love YouTube because I love like going down these, like I spent probably 6 months like looking for ASMR videos when that was like a new thing, or what is it now? They're like making the slime.
kinetic sand?
Yeah, there was even just like, I don't know if you know the movie Elf, where he makes pasta with like candy on it. There's a whole genre of YouTube videos of people making, like kids making their own elf pasta and eating it. Or like if I go to another country where I maybe don't speak the language very well, I still want to watch TV for the commercials. So I'm very omnivorous. I would say. And then I just, visual culture too, like New York City is the best place for that because it's like everything that I see on the street is like feeding into what I'm thinking about.
This isn't an art question, but what's your favorite Chinese restaurant?
In
Chinatown, let's say.
In Chinatown here?
Yeah.
I have a slightly weird relationship with the Manhattan Chinatown because I think some of it is more geared towards tourists. The Flushing Chinatown, I love Dumpling Galaxy. That's a definitive recommendation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thinking about domesticity and like this servitude kind of thing happening, is that important to your work or is it just a byproduct of the practice?
Definitely, yeah, domesticity is important. I've worked a lot in like, in the past in like retail and kind of service industry jobs, and I think a lot about the power dynamics that are involved in who's paying for who to do what, or even like interpersonal power dynamics in relationships, like going back to like the bathtub piece, like I imagine, perhaps the woman who's living in that really fancy apartment may not have the most power in the relationship that she's in. And the way that she lives her life may be sort of dictated by what she is supposed to do for other people. But sometimes like with the spa thing, it's also about how those interactions can be really kind of healing and pleasant and in a moment in which where the power dynamics are sort of actually get really blurry and you don't know who's in control totally. Like I don't normally go and get a manicure, so when I do, I'm just like, thank you. Can I get one different color on each finger? And they're like, okay, I guess so. And then like
I was wondering because you have performances where in one vein you can't see the person you're interacting with, and then you have a whole other part of your practice where you are interacting one-on-one, face-to-face. I was just wondering if your experience with that, the difference between those, what that was like for you, and if you've really kind of felt a different kind of energy maybe, like with the people that you're interacting with based off of this barrier or not?
Yeah. It's definitely a way for both parties to, you're subtracting the visual information so you don't make a lot of the judgments that you might initially make, or at least, I know that I'm biased just as, much as any other person. So I'm just thinking about this morning, like this Wall Street bro like sat down next to me on the train and he said, excuse me, but then he like man-spreaded into my, and like I spent the whole time just being like, oh, but like, I don't necessarily want to be mad at that guy. So if I can put up a little bit of a barrier and make the fact that we are clearly very different people like a playful and obvious thing, then it makes, I feel like I can go further sometimes into what is happening. And it's almost, it can be a little more confrontational, but it's in a playful way, where when you remove that, I definitely have to play a character more and be super duper nice, or in the bathtub piece, I had to really make sure, like strive to not make eye contact or make an expression, because I feel like whatever you show on your body becomes a part of the work.
In one of the pieces you said that time allotted for you to make the piece, I think it was like the Chinese sort of like porcelain piece. And I think sort of like working with takeout culture is like really big part of living in New York. So I'm curious as to how New York sort of affects what you sort of invest in and what you choose to make, given the way that New York works.
I think it completely changed everything about how I made art, because I feel like we're always moving here. And so instead of working on something slowly and steadily where it's like, I have the next month of making this piece planned out where I'm gonna make it 6 hours every day or 10 hours every day, I'm gonna have to kind of, while I'm on the train or while I'm doing other things, strategically sort of always be thinking about it, but then I have to be ready to do like a sprint when it's time to make the work. So I'm collecting and planning, and sometimes I have this giant suitcase, and when I do a show, it's like half of my studio goes into the suitcase and I'm ready, but then I when it comes time to actually make the work, it's got to happen really fast. And I think that doesn't work for everyone, but it works really well for me because it keeps me away from getting stuck in one idea for too long. And because I want to be more responsive to like culture and media, and that's changing so fast, it's great for me to be able to change with it. But it's definitely tough. And sometimes I wish I could go on a regular vacation where I'm not working 20 hours a day on the vacation. But I don't know what it would be like to go back to having so much time. But treasure your time in grad school. Yeah, we can talk more later too.
How do you handle the problem of food waste in your projects?
I try to give a lot of it away or build that into the project. I try to use materials that I may even be able to use again. So if I have to buy a box of something, maybe they're in individual packages, so whatever I don't use can go on to the next project. I take a lot of photos and videos, so maybe just to make myself feel better, but also because it is a material to me, like if I had to throw away a pile of rice and candy, if I got 3 great photos out of that and a piece of a video, then I feel a little bit better about wasting it. But I don't feel so guilty in that I have to make reparations for every time that I throw away something that wasn't eaten, because we waste food all the time, and the footprint of what I do at this moment is not terribly bad. But yeah, it's something that I definitely always have on my mind.
I was wondering, because I've talked to a lot of people recently about performance art and how you're not being paid usually to do it. It seems like you're getting a budget for a lot of the projects that you've done. And I'm wondering if you take a portion of that for yourself, or how you navigate that part of being a performance artist.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something I really want to share with students too, is that it's very hard to negotiate for yourself when you're getting started and you're grateful for the opportunity, but then realizing that my materials cost this much, my transportation costs this much, I need to pay my photographer this much, and over time, as I've done projects, I have a better sense of how much they cost, so that I can tell curators, okay, if you have $100, I can do this. If you have $1,000, I can do that. And if I really love it, and sometimes something comes along and I'm it's worth it to throw everything I have at it. A lot of that will be in my time and my physical labor, but I still, I can't afford to spend all my money on every project. I do ask for honoraria, and sometimes I get to keep them, and sometimes I end up spending it on the piece. But as long as I don't spend my own money making it, then I'm yeah, I did it. So I think for performance artists, it's good to keep track of your expenses even when you're not getting paid back for it, so that later on you can use that information to advocate for yourself And if someone really doesn't want to pay to support your project, then they may not need to have that in their show. And that's okay, because there's always going to be other opportunities.
So if you guys have more questions, I'm sure Alison would be happy to answer them afterwards. I just want to say, I'm just so, as a former student of mine, so proud of you, and so impressed with how you think and speak about your work. You know, I admit that when I first met you, I found your work a little difficult, and you've really, you know, expanded my horizons as a, you know, as a member of the art community, and I just think, you know, you are a fantastic role model for our students, and let's give it up for Alison Kuo.
Thank you.